All right, welcome into Carp's Corner. Sorry, a little under the weather today. Got a little voice action going on, a little sinus stuff going, a little head cold. So a little hoarse today, and apologize for that. But huge show today for Carp's Corner. What we're going to get into, what we're going to talk about, some coaching searches. There's some movement now, even with assistants, as we'll dive into the Ohio State defensive coordinator coaching search and how that's all going to shake out. And when you're adding someone, in college football, you can have one head coach and 10 assistants. And with that, if you're bringing someone on, that means someone has to go. It's a zero-sum game, if you will. So we'll get into that a little bit. Oregon, it's fifth time. It seems like they've been looking for a head coach in the last, 12, 13, 14 years. I mean, they've been kind of spinning through these guys. So we'll have to get into that a little bit. And I think what the Oregon coach needs and who are some of the potential candidates that could be there and how quickly they'll go. And there's some other guys in the Pac-12 that maybe they're at another Pac-12 school and they're not quite happy with where they're at for a variety of reasons. And then we'll get into the Heisman Trophy finalists as well. Odds on that, how that thing's shaking out, because I don't know if there's really going to be a whole lot of intrigue when it comes down to it. Mark Emmert, NCAA commissioner, just so depressing. Like, we lose perspective on society and some of his comments, some of the things that he said. I think, my goodness, the frustrating, disappointing. There's a litany of words that you could use. It's really just a head shaker to me when you sit there and hear some of the things that come out of his mouth. And I forgot, with coaching searches, with coaching hirings, ultimately comes the coaching introductory press conference and how that looks. And the USC Trojans are doing it in a very, very unique way. So we'll get into that as well. I wanted to start off though with Jim Knowles, former Oklahoma State Cowboys defensive coordinator. He's going to finish up the bowl game there. He won't start with Ohio State until after the New Year's Day 6 bowls are all wrapped up to the start of the new year. So he'll get to finish with his team and, in Oklahoma State. And Ohio State won't have to announce or make any changes officially until after that point. And this is where it gets a little dicey when we start talking about some of these coaching hires, these guys that move around a little bit. You're recruiting guys right now, and you have the early signing window. And the early signing window was designed so guys didn't get their scholarships pulled. Well, the problem with that is now all the coaches are sitting here and they're pressuring up, and they want these guys to commit and to sign as early as possible. So they want them to sign during this early signing period. Well, you have coaching changes that are going to probably come after that. And that's going to be a little bit bumpy. It's going to be dicey for some of these recruits because they will probably be committing to someone who may not be there. And that's for all of college football. So there's movement that's going to happen. You're going to see this. And I was a huge proponent of the early signing period, but right now with how it's going on, there's got to be a better way to do it. But that's going to take the presidents, the ADs, to be able to get into a room and agree to some ground rules. And as we saw, and we'll get into with Mark Emmert, who knows if that's possible because of how difficult their jobs can be. But Jim Knowles, his defense at Oregon State, one of the best in the country, fourth in total defense, first in yards per game, or third in yards per game, first in sacks. I mean, they were really good, fifth in rush yards per game, one of the better defenses you're going to find, really, second behind Georgia and behind Wisconsin. So he did a really good job. And so Jim Knowles, older dude, he's been doing this thing for over 30 years. He doesn't have that Nick Saban pedigree or anything like that, but he's bounced around a little bit. What I like about him when I saw this, number one, is he was a player at Cornell. I like guys who play in the Ivy League as coaches. I played for a couple of them. And I always say this, there's a lot of coaches out there who are good at their jobs, but there aren't necessarily a lot of coaches that would be good at jobs in normal society. Jim Knowles, when he got out of Cornell, he worked on Wall Street for a year. I mean, he had other things. He just loved football, wanted to get back into it. I played for a coach, Matt Burke, my linebacker coach in Detroit. Went to Dartmouth. He's a really smart dude. Bill Belichick, really smart dude. Smart guys usually make really good coaches. Now, you can argue how good of head coaches are they. Matt Patricia, he was an aeronautical engineer, struggled in Detroit, but did a great job as the Patriots DC. But these guys, they look at problems a little bit of a different way, and they're always thinking outside of the box. And so I love when I look at Jim Knowles' history. played at Cornell, bounced around a little bit, comes back to Cornell, works his way through, becomes a head coach there, doesn't have a ton of success at Cornell. 26-34 as the head coach, not great. But then after that, goes to Duke with David Cutcliffe, and he's there for 7-8 seasons. He's the defensive coordinator, but he's also the safeties coach. He coaches inside linebackers. The guy, he played some edge, defensive end. He's got a full, well-rounded understanding of what a defense should look like. And so if you go watch Oklahoma State play, you get a sense of that. You get a feeling of it and why it looks so good and why it works so well. And so he's going to run a 4-2-5. And this is basically what everybody runs now, with some version of this, with 5 defensive backs on the field at all times, because with the proliferation of the spread offense, 3, 4, 5 wideouts, you can't have your old school 4-3, 3-4, with 7 true box players. You need, what they would call a nickel standing up and is kind of a DB hybrid safety linebacker guy, at least at the minimum. He's going to do that. Talks about playing the jack position, kind of a stand-up defensive end, move that guy around. It gives you a lot of versatility. Gives you the versatility to go 4 down, go 3 down. You can move around a little bit. So I'm curious to see what he'll play on the back end at Ohio State and how he's going to be able to institute his culture and what he likes to do. He's a really sharp guy. He says he goes into a room for game planning, watches film, comes out with a legal pad, boom, 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 hammers it all down. And this is how we're going to attack this offense. That's kind of his philosophy of how he likes to game plan. Now, one challenge for him will be at Ohio State is when he was at Oklahoma State this year, they were really good. And usually when you're really good, there's a reason for that. You have great players and maybe you have experienced players. All of their starters were 4th-year players or older. And then I believe 1 or 2 6th-year players given the extra COVID year. So he had a very veteran defense. They could do a lot of stuff. They were smart. They could execute at an extremely high level. When you have all those things, it gives you the ability to do a heck of a lot more than maybe you would if you had a younger team. And so this is one of the things with Ohio State. Ohio State is young. They're one of the youngest teams in college football this year. It's not going to bode well. It's not going to be easy. Now, a lot of those guys should be coming back, should be getting some experience. There's some guys entering the portal. They'll pull some guys out of the portal. But Jim Knowles, the new defensive coordinator at Ohio State, curious how this coaching staff, the carousel, will spin on the defensive side of the ball. You got Larry Johnson there, Al Washington, Matt Barnes, Kerry Combs, all kind of working over there. We'll see who stays and who leaves. And kind of how they structure this is Jim Knowles kind of a walk around guy, or will he have a position group in a room? They say he loves to deal with the linebackers, and hopefully that'll be a situation where he can lock in with them and really get them to a point where they're playing at a high level. Because that's something that Ohio State has had for so long, is linebackers that play really well. And in the last handful of years, that's kind of fallen off. Great secondary, great corners, great defensive ends. But being a former linebacker, I want to see linebackers that can go out there and really dominate, be physical, and play at an extremely high level. So that's incredibly important for me to see that and watch him be able to get that done. So Jim Knowles, new defensive coordinator at Ohio State, and excited to get him in here. He looks like a football dude. He's a rough and tumble guy, and excited to watch him coach this entire defense and hopefully specialize on the linebackers a little bit as well. Diving into the coaching searches a little bit. Oregon. Now, with Mario Cristobal going to Miami, Oregon is open. And so if we look at this, their last 5 head coaches, Chip Kelly, who took over for Bellotti, who was there for 4 years, he leaves and goes to the NFL. Then you get Mark Helfrich, who's there for 4 years, who gets fired, but he took Chip's recruits, took Chip's players, took them to a national championship in 2014 against Ohio State. Marcus Mariota, Heisman, we're doing great things. Eventually, that thing falls off, gets fired. Then, they try to solve this thing with a silver bullet, bringing Willie Taggart, guy from the East Coast, Florida dude, bring him in. He's there for 1 year. Then you bring in another Florida guy, Mario Cristobal. He's there for 5 seasons, has some good success, but now he's gone. And so if you look at that, that's really in the last, 15 years, they're going to be sitting here looking now for another coach, for their 5th coach. And this is a place in Oregon that really has limitless resources. Eugene's a great college town. They've made an effort starting back with Bellotti that they want to try to get in the game, and they want to make sure that they have all the cool bells and whistles, the best facilities, the best best uniforms, recruiting, the food, everything. If you go through that place, it looks like a Taj Mahal. It's absolutely phenomenal. And so they want to make sure they have all that, all the bells and whistles, because what they don't have, is the history of a USC or maybe even a Washington. Like they don't necessarily have that long story tradition, or even a UCLA or someone like that, especially not like the schools out on the East Coast or the eastern half of the United States, the Ohio States, the Bamas, the Georgias, the Michigans, Texas. Like they need to make sure, LSU, all these different schools, they have to compete with what kids love today, the gear in Nike. And so Oregon wants to win. There are a lot of schools and programs that will say, hey, we value athletics. We really value football. Because if you value athletics, you have to value football, because football is the revenue driver. It's what drives the entirety of the bus for all of your athletic program because of the money that it generates. So there's people that will say, hey, we value football. And then that's what they say. But then their commitment level to it is different. Their intentions and their commitment vastly different. And so they say this, but they're worlds apart. Oregon, I believe, wants to be really good. They're going to invest. They're going to pay guys. It's a little bit unique. If you're someone who's not from the West Coast, I don't know if you necessarily want to live out there. If you want to recruit out there, it's a little bit different. But there's a lot of talent in California, and Oregon has been doing a great job. And you have Nike at your beck and call all the time. And so there's a lot of great things about the Oregon job. It's a little bit of the new royalty in college football, I would say. Like I said, they don't have that story tradition, but kids today, I mean, you got all the shoes, you get all the gear, you got everything you want. When people go around and look at facilities, you look at Oregon, they got water walls and all kinds of this crazy stuff, and all the recovery tanks and everything that you need, they have it. All the bells and whistles. They've got a beautiful facility out there, and they're going to continue to have all those things. By the way, now with the NIL stuff, if you want to go there, I'm sure they'll be able to get guys some Nike stuff and get that rolling in there. So they've got the resources, but they've got to get this coaching hire right. And I think they're going to want to stay out on the West Coast so they don't have one of these guys jettisoning like Willie Taggart did, or like Mario Cristobal, and leaving and going back east. Brian Kelly, a little different. He went to the NFL. And that's something that I think college programs, you can handle. You can handle when your coach goes to the NFL, but it's tough when you're Notre Dame and your coach goes to LSU, or when you're Oklahoma and your coach goes to USC. If they leave and go to the NFL, it's a whole nother deal. But Oregon pride hurting a little bit right now. So I have a tendency to think they're going to want to stay with someone with West Coast roots. Head coach at Baylor, Dave Aranda. He was at Hawaii. He's a California guy. I don't think he leaves Baylor, but he's someone that provides a little bit of intrigue. I do think right there that there's an element that he's a West Coast guy. They could throw a mountain of cash at him. He'd have limitless resources. He's not somebody that likes to be out in the forefront in the spotlight. And I don't know if you would have to be that at Oregon or not. That's one thing that I don't really know. I'm not super familiar with it, but he seems like a guy who's a little more quiet and reserved. So you got Dave Aranda. People have thrown out Matt Campbell. He's a Midwest dude. He's an Ohio guy. I don't think they go that way. Maybe they ultimately do, but I don't see him wanting to, go and live out in Eugene, even if they back up the Brinks for him. It's just that doesn't seem like he would be a good fit for me right there. Here's where it starts to get interesting now. We've got Justin Wilcox. He's the head coach at Cal, and he's a Duck alum, played at Oregon. So that he's got the ties and understands what it is like. And he was there before it was what Oregon is now, where they're, pretty good team. They've got all the resources in the world. Problem is last year's 5-7 at Cal. His record overall there is 26-28. It's not a great record. And then in 2019, that was their best year. They go 8-5, but he does have those ties. And I think his schools right now are seeing guys leaving and going places and just jumping after the money. There's a little something, I think, in the loyalty aspect, where if you can get an alumnus, if you can have someone who was from there, some of your esteemed alumni, bring them back, it's going to mean more to them than it would other people. And so that's why the Justin Wilcox thing is intriguing. Plus, he's a Cal. And I sat here, I hosted a show on XM with Rick Neuheisel this week. And Rick's a West Coast dude. He was at Colorado. He was at Washington, UCLA. And Rick said, here's the problem with the Cal State schools, the Cal Berkeleys, the UCLAs, is they don't allocate the dollars to it. They don't allocate the dollars. And so while, Cal That's the home of Aaron Rodgers, maybe the best quarterback in the NFL right now and one of the best of the last generation. They don't allocate the dollars to be able to have success. So Justin Wilcox, if he went to Oregon, that would no longer be an issue. The dollars would no longer be an issue. So he would get that box and that thing could be checked off. Now, one of the last things, one of the guys who I find really intriguing, who was at Oregon, who was the first guy on this list, who's at UCLA, who did a pretty good job this year, had a chance to even beat Oregon. They had their backup quarterback in, just couldn't convert fourth down. But Chip Kelly, and Chip Kelly's at UCLA, and they've done a good job upgrading some of the stuff. But I was talking with Rick, who is a UCLA alum who coached at UCLA. They were trying to put together a deal to be able to play at SoFi Arena, or stadium, which is closer than going all the way out to Pasadena to the Rose Bowl. And Pasadena is beautiful, but there's a problem on the West Coast of getting people to games. It's hard to recruit if you have empty stadiums. And so they were working on that. Then they re-signed this long-term deal out in Pasadena with the Rose Bowl. So they're going to be staying out there. And so if you're Chip Kelly, you're wondering, can I really win here? Is this going to be something like I could win and have the resources like I had at Oregon? I think he's a good fit. I like him at UCLA. I think it makes them relevant. I think it's good for college football. But if I'm Chip Kelly, I'm trying to get back to Oregon. Now, hopefully you didn't burn every bridge on the way out. You left him Helfrich. He got into a national championship. Maybe if Chip was there, they found a way, maybe find a way to win one. But he did a great job when he was up there at Oregon. So there should still be some positive feelings. I think Chip Kelly's done a pretty good job of turning around that UCLA program, getting them in a good spot. They don't want to spend the money, just like Cal doesn't want to spend the money. Not an issue at Oregon. They will spend the dollars. And so if you're a coach, what are your intentions? And then what are your actions? All right. Your commitment level. You can intend and talk about this, but over here, you actually have to buck up and spend the money. And I don't think that they're doing that really at a lot of the California schools. Wouldn't surprise me if Chip Kelly goes. My two favorites in the clubhouse, Justin Wilcox, Chip Kelly, to take that job. So since we're talking about California schools, the coach who came from Oklahoma, who goes to Southern California, who takes over the USC job, Lincoln Riley. I sat here and watched this press conference yesterday. I don't even think you could call it an introductory event, I guess, because you couldn't call it really a presser. And Lincoln Riley comes in. There's a handful of people behind him. They've got a band up there. There's dudes in sunglasses and shades. They're playing the fight song. There's 3 cheerleaders dancing. The camera is oscillating between looking at Lincoln and then looking down at the cheerleaders, looking at the band. I mean, it was an absolute crap show. It was a circus. It was an absolute circus. I love nostalgia. I'm a big fan of it, but I don't know, for your coaching hire at a place like USC, if that's really where we need to be right now, when you're bringing a guy in and you're introducing him, like, hey, you juxtapose that to Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman and how that looked. And it's Marcus standing at a podium, just answering questions and, talking about Notre Dame move stuff in you. And I guess, that's maybe the difference of Notre Dame and USC now. A lot of flash. Maybe Notre Dame's a little more substance. I don't know. I know Lincoln Riley, I believe him to be a great offensive football coach. We'll see if he can get it done. He told his players that he wants it to be the mecca of college football. That is USC. I believe that he wants to get it there. And I believe that he has a shot at getting it there. He kept a lot of recruits home. If he can recruit at a high level, he's got to develop those guys, make them tough, and to turn them into really good football players and not just highly recruited athletes. But he's got to turn them into those NFL prospects. And he's done that for the most part. But that stinking press, the event, I mean, that's where we're at right now. It is a straight dog and pony show at USC. And they backed up the truck. They paid him. USC, and this was something I didn't probably know until about 15 years ago, they're not part of the California state public school system. It's a private school, so they can do what they want. No one's going to really know what Lincoln's getting paid unless they leak that out, how much they're spending, what it all looks like. We've talked through, 8 years, 110 million, the jets and all this stuff he has access to, but it's a private school. It does have some wealthy boosters. They're playing in the Coliseum. It's still going to get tough to get people there. And so they're trying to get buzz. They're competing with the Rams. They're competing with the Chargers, who both of them, even though the Rams are pretty good, aren't drawing all that well. And so you have to ask yourself, and people in Southern California, do they still really care about football, and especially about college football? Heisman finalists announced who will be going to New York: Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Aiden Hutchinson, Kenny Pickett. Found it interesting. Like, if you look at the cluster of this, Aiden Hutchinson, Michigan, CJ Stroud, Ohio State, Kenny Pickett, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, like 3 clustered guys out of the Midwest. And then the guy who's ultimately going to win it, who the odds are out of control on, you're not getting any value on, is Bryce Young. It's of Alabama. So he's gonna win this thing. It's pretty much set up. And it comes down to this: Heisman moments. He had the biggest Heisman moment against Georgia and had a great drive the last week against Auburn. People are going to get upset about the snubs of Kenneth Walker III, Matt Corral not being there. So Matt Corral, against great teams, he didn't really play all that well. You can argue that he was beat up. But yet, here's the thing. This isn't me saying this. It's just me telling you how the process works. Most of the voters with college football are heavily regional. People on the West Coast, you've got your Southeast, you've got your Midwest, Plains, Northeast, whatever it is. Unless you're in their footprint, they're not watching a lot of your games. They're watching the big games. So on the big games, you have to step up and play really well. And that was the problem with Matt Corral. He didn't get a ton of big games, and he got beat up. Didn't finish the season as strong as he probably would have liked. Kenneth Walker, huge platform against Michigan. 5 touchdowns, set records, does a great job. His last big game against Ohio State doesn't really answer the bell and doesn't play very well. He kind of limps out, gets hurt, but, has less than 30 yards rushing. And so that's the lasting memory that people have in their mind of Kenneth Walker III. And it doesn't make him a bad player. It doesn't mean he shouldn't be there, but that's just how the voting goes for most of these guys, especially for national guys. They flip on the big game. Let's see what the dude's going to do here at a huge, huge moment. Does he produce or does he not? Well, that's how they're going to judge it. They'll look and make sure you've got the requisite stats and everything looks good, but they want to see what you're going to do in big games. That's a huge, huge element of it. And then lastly, Mark Emmert. It's almost as if the NCAA president, Mark Emmert, he lives with his foot in his mouth. The things that he says. Now, I understand he's hired by the presidents to do a job that nobody wants to do. It's a little bit Roger Goodell light. He's not getting paid, 40 or 50 million, but he's getting handsomely rewarded. Let's just say that. I mean, it's a nice, healthy 7-figure salary. And Mark Emmert's a smart guy. Why they chose to die on the name, image, and likeness hill instead of trying to slowly let some of those things happen, slowly introduce transfers without restrictions. Instead, they tried to hold the dam back and that thing exploded. And that's why we now have a little bit of this chaos that's ensuing, because they chose to spend tens of millions of dollars in court instead of tens of millions of dollars of trying to solve the problem. But Mark Emmert's in Vegas. He's out there talking at the podium, and he drops a line that my family of laborers, my grandfather laid carpet, my other grandfather, installed glass in high rises. Like, that's what my brothers, work in construction. My parents were teachers and stuff, but we had a farm, work outside, actual physical labor. This stuff right here, this is soft. This is soft. It's climate controlled. It's easy. It's not a big deal. But Mark Emmert drops out there. Being a university president is the hardest job in America. Let me tell you what a university president really does. They have to, handle some nonsense, some things at the top. And right now they're dealing with all the diversity, equity, inclusion, all their initiatives. But they're a glorified fundraiser, a speech giver, and a ribbon cutter. Like, that's what the university president does. And anytime there's any big decisions that are made, the board comes in as well, and they'll try to help direct it, navigate it. But COVID was the first time that it exposed a lot of these university presidents who were above reproach, who were always above criticism. People knew who they were, but they never did anything. So they never had to go to a podium and answer tough questions like, well, we don't want to play football this year. Why is that? Well, we don't think it's safe. Well, they're doing it and they think it's safe. Well, yeah, but we don't. We have better doctors. Like, they finally had to answer questions last year and they didn't like it. And people realized that a lot of these people are just empty suits walking around. Like I said, they raise money, they give speeches, and they cut ribbons at ceremonies. Like, that's what they do. And so for Mark Emmert to say that it's the hardest job in America does a disservice to all of our first responders, our public defenders, our military, people that are working construction, hard physical labor jobs, who do all those things. Like, I'm almost at a loss for words for him to say that. Like, I understand he wants to defend the people that elect him and pay his salary. That's great. But the hardest job in America, you got to be kidding me, man. They're all really well compensated. There were suits to work. They have to very rarely make difficult decisions. The board helps them with any of that stuff, and they just go around in glad hand. Don't sit here and tell me this crap that it's the hardest job in America. It's almost nauseating to think that that would be the case and that someone would say that. And then now the other thing that you do is you go out there and another statement you make, like, I don't know how we're going to be able to handle all this. We need congressional intervention, correct? Congressional involvement again. Dude, you're paid a lot of money. Solve problems. These presidents, they got 35 degrees. Solve problems. I got 2 degrees right there behind me. I'm not saying I'm the smartest guy in the world. I'm well educated, but man, make me a university president. I'll go you solve problems. Put them out there, see a problem, solve it. Don't sit here, oh, we can't do it. We need Congress to come in. No, you don't. There's opportunities to solve things. You buried your heads in the sand and you didn't do it. And now that's why we have the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness and all this stuff that happened all at once. And it's entertaining as hell, but it's a little difficult to handle. But I don't want to hear this stuff anymore, Mark Emmert. Don't sit there and tell me that being a university president is one of the hardest jobs in America, because we have real people doing real things and not just pushing papers, cutting ribbons, giving speeches, and raising money. That's it for this edition of Carp's Corner. Thanks for listening. Sorry for the voice. Got a little head cold here, but I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks.